Because when you go to war, you are going to be killing people. War is so unpredictable that you may, there's a chance that you went in and killed Gaddafi, and then all of a sudden some benevolent person steps up, and all of a sudden you've got this flourishing democracy. Okay, what are the chances of that? No, very small, but you don't know that it's going to go into this completely failed state. You have high hopes. So we don't necessarily know where we're going to go, which means you've got to have, once again, like the open mind to say, oh, this isn't going the way we thought it was going to go. How are we going to adjust right now to prevent this from getting worse? Which means what you really have to do is, prior to intervening in other countries, you have to assess what sacrifices you are willing to make to get the result that is positive. And those could be massive. I always talk about, if you're going to go to war, you've got to have the will. And that will comes in two forms. Number one is the will to kill. Because when you go to war, you are going to be killing people. You're going to be killing the enemy, and you're going to be killing civilians. And that's not what we're trying to do. And believe me, the U.S. military goes through great lengths to prevent that from happening. But it is going to happen. It's war. So you have to be willing to kill. You have to be willing to have that happen. And you have to be willing to die, because when you go to war, there's going to be American kids that are not going to come home. And so you have to have those two wills. That's before you go in. So you can't look at it and say, well, we can go into Libya, we can move this guy, and probably it'll turn out okay, so we don't have to worry about what the sacrifices are going to be. So when we start looking at going into other countries, we need to start thinking, okay, what level of commitment do we really have to make this successful? When we talk about these things, we have to be very sure about what we're going to do. We have to recognize that we can't predict everything, because we can't. I don't care how good you are, I don't care how many analysis you put on something. When you start throwing human nature into a leadership vacuum, all these things are going to break out, and it can go very, very bad. It can go well too, but it can go very, very bad. And so what are we willing to sacrifice? What are we willing to spend? How many of our brothers and sisters in uniform are we willing to sacrifice to make this happen? And how does it help our national security? Iraq would be a pretty strong, positive place right now if we had kind of completed the mission the way that we should have. Again, when we go back and we say, okay, well, what countries is it worth going into? Where are we going to go? How do we draw that line? How do we make that decision? For me, this is what we do as leaders. What we do as leaders, we look at a situation, and sometimes, you got to ask yourself, do we have a moral obligation to go somewhere? If there's a genocide happening, if there's another Rwanda happening, where 800,000 Tutsis are killed in 100 days with machetes, if that's going on, do we have a moral obligation to try and do something to help that? Hey, that's a decision you have to make. That's a hard decision to make as a leader, because guess what? You're going to lose 30, 40, 100 Americans that are going in there and trying to shut this thing down. But that's the type of thing we need to think about, and that's why, as a leader, you want to have an open mind. You want to have your ego completely out of it, because it's real easy to say, "Oh, we're America. This is what we do. We're going to win." It's like, no, actually, we made a bad decision, and we're actually leaving right now because we think the expenditure from here on out is going to be too high. Unfortunately, I think in Iraq, we paid the upfront expenditure. We had invested lives and treasure to try and get that place stabilized. We had done a decent job. We were almost there, and we left early. And all of a sudden, we look around and go, oof. But that's why these things are important to think about thoroughly, as Tulsi said, before you go. We don't know what's going to happen.